Welcome back to Something is Up. Today's guest is Steve Bassett, the first person in US history to register as a lobbyist in Washington, specifically for the cause of UFO disclosure. For nearly 30 years, Steve has been at the center of the efforts to end what he calls the truth embargo, which is the government's refusal to acknowledge the extraterrestrial presence on this planet. This conversation could not be more timely. We've just had the 4th congressional hearing on UAPs, the 3rd one with whistleblowers under oath, and yet the UAP Disclosure Act has once again failed to pass in Congress. At the same time, narratives about UFO and non-human intelligences are being pushed by governments and the media, but they don't really match the very different stories coming from contactees, experiencers, and researchers from outside the official channels. In this interview, we explore the power struggles behind disclosure with a capital D, the evolution of the truth embargo, the risk of the so-called controlled versus catastrophic disclosure, and the deeper question of how we reconcile official narratives with the parallel reality of experiencers. Steve has been in this fight for 3 decades. His insights are direct, uncompromising, and ultimately filled with hope for what disclosure could really mean for humanity. So let's dive in. Hey, Steve, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, sir.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Washington D.C. weather at this time of year is as good as it gets. So we're trying to enjoy the weather. That's at least something.
Understood. So I want to go straight into some good stuff because a lot has been happening on this topic that you've been basically following and leading for how many years now? More than 30 years?
It will be 30 years next July. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 30 years basically in January.
So, and I'm also curious to understand how your perspective changed in the last 30 years, right? Since you started, and you started, I believe, with John Mack. You are probably, no, I'm not sure whether you are still the only one, but you were the first one to register as a lobbyist on the topic of UFO disclosure. You've seen it all, at least in our, let's say, modern history. But a lot of things seems to be accelerating. And I know that in this field, it goes on waves, and you've seen, let's say, other waves growing and then fading away. So what's your basic perception of what's going on right now? Am I correct in saying that there is maybe an unprecedented wave of improvements and disclosure happening right now on the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to use the wave analogy, starting at the very beginning, go back to 47, the issue is being engaged by the public. The government made the decision that it was going to try to deny everything, make everything classified, and then just deny the existence, and the public will do what it does. And so the public engagement of the issue in the early days was like a wave. It would go up and down and up and down. And then it started, the wave started to get a little bigger, right? But in 2017, they started getting real big. And while it still had its ups and downs, the waves are much bigger. And that's the way to use that analogy. And so that wave is about to crash on the beach. And it's going to be a pretty big wave when it finally hits the beach. Tsunami. I would say you could say it will be a tsunami when it finally arrives.
And I had this conversation with an Italian journalist just last week about the pre-2017 history and the post-2017, because 2017 has been, again, as you mentioned, the year that everything seems to have changed right, when it comes to modern history of the phenomenon. What is it for you? What was for you 2017? And so what was the before and after of December 2017?
Well, yeah, my work is I'm an activist on an issue. And the issue is the disclosure by governments of the extraterrestrial presence. This has been denied and obscured and classified from the world for now 80 years. The justification for this policy in the initial years, starting in 47 and going forward, was understandable. The problem is that they didn't end it soon enough. In other words, they had a good basis to classify this thing and deny it, but at some point that became more of a liability, and the shelf life of their approach to this, which is essentially to institute a truth embargo, which is what I call it, ended some time ago. And so since then, things have gotten very unpleasant. So I am essentially a disclosure advocate, meaning I want heads of state to confirm the extraterrestrial presence. Once that happens, we're in a whole different place. Everything starts to change in our world. But behind that, I'm basically an anti-war, anti-nuclear arms race advocate. There are plenty of those, so they don't need one more. But my work ultimately is in front of that, because at the core reason why we should even care about the ET presence and what they've done, right? The core reason is that there is a connection between the modern engagement of us by these non-human entities, which I prefer to call extraterrestrial because I believe they are from other planets, and the nuclear situation and the general circumstances of our modern era, which starts early 20th century, all right, but really takes off right after World War II. And the last 80 years have been the most profound, most changing, most dangerous in the history of this planet. And I believe the presence of the ETs and the escalating engagement that they've been demonstrating is directly connected to that. And so once you get there, there is a connection between what the ETs are doing, why they're doing it, and the problems that we have created for ourselves. The nuclear arms race, which is now at an absolute high-risk situation, the mass population of the planet, the enormous impact on the biosphere, all of these things, which are creating almost unimaginable problems, which seem unsolvable, but I think they are. There is a connection between these two. And once you get there, then the need to get this confirmation of their presence, so that the entire world, the entire civilization and all its intellectual power and capabilities can address it, engage it, understand it, and possibly lead to open contact. It becomes a really big deal. So for me, all the work I'm doing, and for long as I'm doing, I don't know if I could have done it if it was just about, oh, gee, we need to announce that there's ETs here. I knew there were ETs here when I was a kid. It was obvious. I say a kid, a teenager, and I've known ever since. So what? So there's ETs here. Is that enough to spend 30 years of your life and pretty much give up almost everything else? No. But once you understand there's a connection between their presence and the fact that we're heading towards nuclear war and planetary destruction in other ways, then that's worth putting 30 years. That's worth putting the rest of your life into it. And at the center of that decision is something which is in play right now, which is what I'm most focused on, is that of all the things ETs have done in the modern era, if they help build the pyramids, good on them, great, fine. I'd love to find out how they did that, but whatever. But in the modern era, the single most important thing we know about the extraterrestrial presence is that they have turned off the nuclear weapons in the United States a number of times. They've turned them off in the Soviet Union, and they've actually turned them on or put them into launch mode in the Soviet Union and the United States. That is the single most important reason, and why I am absolutely convinced that the disclosure process, which is being facilitated by the extraterrestrials, has something to do with getting us through this. In other words, getting beyond this nuclear arms race, this mutual assured destruction nonsense, and maybe even getting beyond war as politics by other means, and the continuing slaughter of each other for what are basically stupid reasons, right? So we're at a juncture that's just hard to even describe how important it is. And that's why I do what I do. And so right now, for me, it's all about the nuclear connection. It's all about getting the nuclear shutdown witnesses in front of the Congress, getting the word out, more people understanding what's going on. It's been around for a long time. The issue is kind of well known. The shutdowns, there's been books, there's been documentaries, but it hasn't been engaged politically yet. But it's about to finally turn up in front of a hearing in Congress of the United States after 80 years, 60 years after the first shutdowns at Minot and Maelstrom. So that's kind of what's going on right now. That's just part of what's going on right now. And one of the reasons why we are in an unprecedented place regarding this issue.
Understood. And totally agree. So this conversation, for many people, is quite difficult because there are so many narratives, there are a lot of facts, and there are a lot of opinions, right? And it's very difficult for people that are new to this to this topic, discern what is fact, what is personal opinion or fiction, disinformation, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. What would you define as the baseline for this conversation? What are the facts that we can base this conversation on? And then we can discuss about the narrative, because, for instance, we tend as humans to simplify the conversation that we have. And today, my opinion is that there are quite a few narratives, very simple, very simplified, that have been pushed. There's a narrative of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensionals are threats, national security issue. There's the narrative of, no, they're all good, they're all angels, they're all spirits, etc. There is a narrative that is towards, they're not physical, the crafts are not really crafts, they're orbs in the sky, they're all angelic beings or demonic beings, etc., etc. And we tend to put stuff in silos when reality is probably much, much more complex than simplification. So if you had to explain, what are the baseline facts that you base your everything else on top of it? And then what are your, based on those facts, your consideration of what's going on right now?
If you're asking me, how do I prove that there's an extraterrestrial presence right now? I don't do that. In other words, it's been proven. That's a done deal. So everything I do is operating on the fact that it's been proven. Yeah. But what you're referring to is very important, and I'll tell you why. There's a reason why there are so many narratives. There's a reason why there have been so many fakes, so many imposters, so much flim-flam, nonsense. There are a number of reasons for it, right? That was not necessary, but it's been part of the truth embargo's modus operandi, meaning this: the government has deliberately prevented this issue from being resolved, proven. They've interfered. They've thrown in fake information. They've encouraged stupid theories. They've undermined the issue and demeaned it, created what I call an intellectual ghetto, so that people with money, important scientific organizations wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. All right. And so they deliberately made it impossible to come to conclusions. If the government, and the governments have done this from time to time, this is probably the most flagrant and significant. But if science, when the government interferes with science, okay, so in other words, let's say the United States government decided that it just didn't want people learning about quantum physics. Quantum physics is pretty exotic. It's amazing. It changes your worldview in a lot of ways. It's almost scary at times. So the government would say, look, we don't want people to know about quantum physics. So we're going to deliberately suppress the research. We're going to undermine it. We're going to try to keep funding out of it. We're going to call quantum physicists fools, idiots, jokers, anything to just muddy it up and make it impossible to resolve. Hell, we would have gone nowhere in quantum physics. It would have been a disaster, and people would have been appalled, right? That's what they did. So the truth of the extraterrestrial presence was nailed down solid, believe it or not, in 1947 when the press release went out from Roswell. Walter Haut put it out with the approval of Blanchard, the base commander, and said, we have a crash saucer that had been which was one of these things that had been seen for a while since the Nagasaki and Hiroshima events. Sightings started increasing, and one of these types of craft, pretty much very likely the ones that Kenneth Arnold reported over Mount Rainier, two of them possibly, we think, crashed in Roswell and nearby, and they got the wreckage. They didn't, but before they could get to the part of the wreckage that had the bodies, they did put out a press release saying, we've got one of those craft. And those craft that were seen, it was kind of understood. They were very unusual. They were able to fly in ways that our planes could not. And so at that point, the press release went out. It was being picked up by the AP, and other newspapers were writing articles about it. And so, bingo, that's it. We knew. Shortly after that, they found the bodies, but before that could go anywhere, the government stepped in. Almost certainly with President Truman's directive, that story had to be changed, and they did. They had it changed by later that evening, and a press release went out the next day that became another article saying, no, it was not a flying saucer. It was whatever the hell else they said it was. And thus begins, essentially, that's the beginning of the truth embargo, which is now approaching 80 years on. So now it's also the case that the Roswell case has been studied and more witnesses have been interviewed than any other case ever by Stan Friedman, Don Schmidt, Thomas Carey, and others. It has been investigated to death. And the result of those investigations and interviews, including deathbed confessions, which culminate in the masterwork Witness at Roswell and its second edition, Witness to Roswell, by Carey and Schmidt. Anybody who is not biased that reads that book, bingo, they know what happened. It's right there. So it's not necessary to do much more than that in terms of the ET presence. As I've said, the ET presence is not deep science. It's simple. It's about as simple as trying to determine, for whatever reason, whether there are Japanese tourists that come to Hawaii. You go to Hawaii and you interview some people and they say, I'm from Japan. Bingo, it's case solved. You don't need to know anything more about that. And so the idea of the ET presence, that was easy. Why they're here, who they are, how the craft work, what's going on, that's a different matter. And so when people say, how do you prove the ET presence? I say it's simple. Just read the accounts, read the research and the interviews of firsthand witnesses. Done deal. Now, how do the craft work? Why are they here? Do they have underground bases and all that stuff? That's a different matter. Now, the government's challenge with the truth embargo, which is why the truth embargo is so amazing, was not to just suppress any of the science they learned from crash vehicles or everything else they learned from whatever analysis and surveillance they're doing. They had to literally suppress their very existence. In other words, they don't exist. They're not here. Anything you see to the contrary is a fake or a fraud or you're insane. That is what they had to do. And they managed to successfully do that and have still essentially successfully done that for 80 years. It is a remarkable thing that they pulled it off, and how they pulled it off is a story that must be studied in depth. There needs to be documentaries, major historical works. How did the United States and its allies prevent the entire world from knowing something that was literally obvious? It was all over the place, and convince them, don't go there, it's not real, stay away from it, for 80 years. Amazing. All right.
Yeah.
And so once you understand that they're here, which is not difficult to understand, then the question is, okay, what more can you learn? And so the researchers, the citizen researchers, who with virtually no funding, no support from any scientific institutions of any importance, no support from the government, literally paying their own way, making huge personal sacrifices. Citizen scientists and researchers have been able to put together a pretty comprehensive picture of what is actually going on with respect to this presence, right? Now, of course, everything that they come up with, the mainstream says it's nonsense. If the photo is blurry, it's useless. If the photo is crystal clear, it's a fake. On and on and on. If you're a contactee, you're delusional, you're insane. And on and on and on, and yet they kept doing it. They piled up 70 years, right? From 1947 to 2017, 70 years of an enormous compendium of research, investigation, and accounts and studies, right, that prove within that compendium, knowing that there's some flaws in there, there's some misunderstandings, which is true of all science, beyond any reasonable doubt, most of the major points. And the government still said, there's nothing there. All right? And so the proof of the ET presence is overwhelming. The understanding of the ET presence is pretty well advanced thanks to citizen science journalists who are not recognized. They will not get any prizes. They will not get any MacArthur grants. But they did the hard work. But the other thing that the citizen researchers and journalists discovered is, in addition to all the efforts they were making to understand this phenomena, the government was spending billions to understand the phenomena and accumulating highly sophisticated understanding and information about this, completely classified and off the radar, funded by black money and so forth. And so they have their body of research, their compendium of research, and the government has his compendium of research, right? But the two shall never meet. All right? And so this is the bizarre situation that was going on decade after decade. Meanwhile, we were building up to 86,000 nuclear weapons, 9 nuclear countries. We nearly had nuclear war on a number of occasions. We had all kinds of proxy wars killing tens of millions of people. While the citizen compendium of research about an ET presence and the government compendium was sitting there, and we couldn't really break through to get to a resolution, which I define as disclosure with a capital D. Confirmation from heads of state, starting with almost certainly one first and then the rest follow. And whoever goes first gets the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize, whatever the hell prizes, and all the prizes. And the one who comes second gets nothing. But they will all get on board. And then 2017 arrives. And the reason, and I can spend hours on this, obviously we're not going to do that, but the reason that 2017 is the breakthrough, my opinion, others might disagree, is that what happened in 2017 is that X number of individuals still working within what we call the military intelligence complex, which includes all of the intelligence agencies, all of the armed services, all of the departments, such as the Department of Defense, including the Department of Energy and so forth. The whole enchilada now is called the military intelligence complex. Some call it the deep state. That's a misnomer. I don't use it. It's wrong. X number of people still working within that complex, and some that are retired started talking to each other. This is how things move forward in this world. They started talking to each other privately, at lunch, at dinner, on WhatsApp, whatever the hell, about the fact that they had a common understanding that this truth embargo had gone on too long, that it was more now of a liability and a danger than a national security protection. And it needed to end. What could they do? And the end result of all these discussions and interactions and reaching out and so forth, which could have gone in 1,000 different ways, the end result is they elected to come forward as part of a company initially funded, in other words, startup funding, by, as it happened, a successful musician who is really interested in the subject, studied it extensively. He's not a college grad, but a smart guy, and he studied, very interested in it, and he had the funds to sort of reach out and engage it, and he'd engaged some of the people in our field, going all the way back to the early 1990s. He turns up again in a major way because he essentially provided the startup money to create a company which was called the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. Doesn't matter what it's called. It's an interesting name. The reason it was called that is the company, which ended up being defined as a public benefit company, which is not a charity, not a nonprofit, but not a strict for what we'll call a commercial entity, but it is a commercial entity. But it has to operate under certain strictures that benefit the public in ways that standard corporations do not or have to. It was going to involve research and entertainment and information, both books and video and so forth, which gave it a kind of a nice, safe configuration that had the potential to make a lot of money, which was useful because, and important, because the people that were going to coming forward, their financial futures were going to be significantly impacted, meaning their opportunity for post-retirement contracts, the potential other risks for them could mean that financially this could not go well for them. In other words, this was one of the prices they were willing to pay. But if this company succeeded, then that would be nice. And so they come out as the To the Stars Academy. Okay, fine. They come out on October the 11th of 2017. And the leader and the head of the company is rock musician Tom DeLonge. But the 10 people that are essentially involved in this, that are in, they're basically involved, right? Whether they're a director or whether they're simply involved in an entity. These 10 people will go down in history as the 10 individuals who broke the ice, right? They broke the ice so we could get through. They crashed, they broke the glass ceiling, whatever the hell you want to call them. That was the milestone event. Why? Because they all had substantial careers, legitimate, easily verifiable careers in the military intelligence complex, including the Department of the DoD Department of Intelligence, the DI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, right? The DIA, the CIA, the Lockheed Martin. Okay. Oh my Lord, there were several other entities that they were attached to. Some of them were multiple CIA,
Bigelow, et cetera, et cetera.
And so, whoa. And this anybody that understands this issue would have immediately known, my God, what has just happened here? They're basically coming forward behind clearly the idea that the ET issue is absolutely real and there's an extraterrestrial presence. And so they came out on October 11th. There was a film, and so I realized this was the breakthrough moment. The decisions of these people to come forward, to put their bios and their photo up on a website, promote it aggressively, meant that something had happened. And what had happened, as far as I'm concerned, though they have never really said it, I think, out loud, but maybe they have, is that they are standing in for a lot of other people in the military intelligence complex that feel as they do, that this embargo must end, but they are not. Their circumstances do not allow them to come out in that way. So they're standing in for others, maybe hundreds, who knows, maybe thousands of people working in all of those intelligence agencies and services and so forth that feel bad about the fact that they have to continue to lie to the American people and the world every single day. Okay, and then I'll finish up that part of my discussion here this way. I knew it was a milestone. I knew it was a breakthrough game changer, but that obviously was not enough. What was going to be their first move? What was going to be the first thing that would come out of this? How big would it be? And it happened in only 60 days. little over 60 days after they announced their presence formally. Website goes up. Several of the people involved in the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, it may have been already underway. Doesn't matter. Whatever the ramp up was doesn't matter. But 60 days later, important stories, important information that they had delivered to the New York Times hits, boom. Major stories, several embedded. They occurred in two articles in separate days, I think in December 16, 17. And of course, the whole thing went up on the internet with video. And when I saw that, and I was in the UK at the time, it took me months to get back. Boy, I wish I had not gone at this point because I didn't know this was coming. When that hit, then I knew this is definitely it. And that everything unfolds from those two New York Times stories going forward. That there was no going back. There was going to be no 1969 Robertson Report, destruction of NICAP, ending Blue Book nonsense, whereas, there's nothing really here, would leave us alone. That was not going to happen. And so we were now on a fairly direct course that was going to lead to disclosure. The only question was, how long would it take? And so that is the breakthrough. And since then, of course, the history of this is well known. It's going to be well covered. And I've tried to help as best I can, given what limitations I have, and play a part in it. But over these 8 years now, more and more high-level people, insiders, military, and of course politicians and so forth have engaged this issue. It's gotten more coverage than ever in all of history. Probably 20, 30,000 articles in the last 8 years. I've got about 8,000 of them, which I think, I say articles, it is a broad spectrum of media, but in terms of the solid core media, the professional media, I've got about 8,000 articles already linked on my website right now. You can go read all 8,000. And so we have been marching toward disclosure, but it has not been easy. It never was going to be easy, but it didn't have to be as hard as it has been. But history is what it is. It is, it's like a tide going through the ocean. You want to sail somewhere, fine, but the tide is going to be a factor, and it's not a damn thing you can do about it. So you have to adjust to the tides in order to get where you're going. You just can't make them go away. And the tides of history are nasty and unpredictable and changing, so forth. So that is why 8 years on, we still haven't got disclosure, but we are very close.
So first of all, thank you very much for it's an incredible clear picture for people that have not followed this topic for so far, and even for people that have been following it. Of course, in this field there is a lot of nonsense, a lot of infight between groups and people, etc. I'm not going to go there. I don't care. One of your colleagues and I think dear friends, Richard Dolan, defined what has happened and what's happening as a factional war between factions of the intelligence community, military personnel, etc., etc. As of today that we are recording this episode, a few important things have happened in the last few days. One is that it seems that for the third time in a row, for the third year in a row, the UAP Disclosure Act amendment might not be included into the NDAA.
Won't be. It's not going to make it.
Not going to make it. And
it's cooked. It's done. Yeah.
Yeah. A few weeks ago, we had the fourth, I believe, congressional hearing in Congress, the third of which had whistleblowers under oath. So a lot of movement, but still resistance, and UAPDA killed for the third time. And today, the second part of an interview with one of the whistleblowers in the last Congress hearing, Dylan Borland, basically seemed, for the tone that he used, they were going towards what Carnell defined as catastrophic disclosure rather than controlled disclosure. But again, this is a matter of opinions. What's your take on now, the last 3 months of where we are today?
Oh, yeah. Boy, I can give you a couple hours on that. All right, first, we'll start with this. Ending a truth embargo that's 80 years on, that deals with the most highly classified stuff in the government. And it probably is referential to reference. It's the most important information we've ever known. Again, I don't know about ancient times, don't care about them, but in terms of the modern human civilization, which is spacefaring and extraordinarily high tech, it's the most important information we've ever known, and it has the implications that are beyond measure. All right. Given that that has been suppressed, undermined, and embargoed for all these years, the idea that finally having not just the United States, but pretty much every developed country out there, particularly the ones that have high tech and air forces and so forth, have known about this, that this was going to finally result in them finally stating one by one, yeah, no, BP's been here. We know a whole bunch about it. We didn't tell you because we didn't think you had a right to know, blah, blah, blah. The idea that that was going to be easy, that would be like, oh, they're just going to finally come together and say, look, enough is enough. It's time for you to know the truth. We feel bad about this. We're so sorry. And come and no. There are, by 80 years on, there are dozens of entrenched interests and careers and whatever that are going to be impacted by this. They've created a mess, okay? A kind of Gordian knot, you might. They've tied themselves up into a giant Gordian knot, 1,000 times bigger than the one was in the history of Macedonia and Alexandria. And there was a Gordian knot. It was really real. And the idea of untying it or getting it was going to be easy. No. But what's important is that while it has been difficult and there has been back and forth and conflict and a lot of upheaval and also a lot of nonsense on the part of just regular people who have the internet and access to this and they're having fun with it, all of that reflecting the fact that just the world we're living in now is almost extraterrestrial in a sense compared to the world we were living in 1950, 1960. It's almost like we're on another planet, right? That this was going to be simple and easy and wasn't going to be messy. Absolutely not. But what's important is all of the stuff that's been going on. We know it. We see it. It's happening in the open, right? In other words, the DOD pushes back. We see it happening in real time. Somebody tries to block, or push back on a witness. It's happening. We're covering it all. It's in other words, when they said back in the 60s, a very famous phrase, which came from Abby Hoffman, I think, but whatever, it might have been Tom Hayden, that the revolution will be televised. What they were saying is, you want to have another revolution, okay, but it's going to be, we're going to have a revolution, but it's going to be harder for you to deal with because this one, unlike all previous ones, is going to be televised. Okay, the message I give to all those inside government that are determined that this embargo is going to last until they're dead and don't have to deal with it, the consequences, is that the what I call it, the end of the end of the truth embargo, the disclosure process, is not just televised; it is globally manifested. Right? It's not like you can turn on your TV and watch it on black and white on 3 stations. Everything that is happening is spreading around the world through the biggest communications network, obviously, and ever. That's so vast, it's hard to even measure. Everybody's connected to everybody else. They've got all kinds of ways to interact. They've got all kinds of ways to put information out. It's hard to even describe the scope of what I call the neural network. It's literally a human brain in a sense. It's the neural network or the neurosphere that Thierry Chardin made famous back in the 60s, right? It's a book that's referred to all the time. He said, way ahead of his time, so where we were going is that the human race would literally become so connected, it would be like a giant brain with the trillions and trillions of synapses and so forth that we have up there that makes us incredibly cool. though we only use so little of it because, well, we're idiots, right? But whatever. Okay. And so, yeah, it's a mess, but it's happening in the open. And so while I understand that there are fights on the internet and somebody's mad at this and whatever, it's okay. We're following that. And for those of you that are upset by this, they're angry that people are calling each other names, or you're a fool, or you're a scammer, or a grifter, or a liar, or whatever the hell, right? For those of you that are upset by that, understand that there is one culprit here. The reason you're seeing this much noise, this much conflict, this much just poo-pah is not, well, it to some degree it's human failings. I mean, that's what we are. We humans tend to do these kinds of things. But there's one fundamental culprit. The United States government did everything it could to make sure that happened. It's like instigating a bar fight, right? You just go into a bar and you want to have a fight, so you just take a bottle, hit somebody over the head. Next thing you know, everybody's throwing bottles around. And then you just walk out the back door and say, hey, that was fun. The government is doing everything it can to make this way. And our job is to understand that and stop doing it. And so for people that are fighting with somebody else, they need to understand the reason that you're maybe acting out or not being helpful is because the government wants you to do that and has gone to a lot of great length to help you do that, right? In other words, we're not going to resolve this. And if you guys want to fight and scream at each other, fine, do it for the next 100 years. And I'm saying don't. So don't blame each other for like, well, why are you such an asshole? Or why do you have this theory? Blah. Don't blame them for that. Understand that that is that is exactly what has emerged out of the truth embargo. And once people understand the truth embargo and the policies that made it, they can kind of chill out, step back and say, look, before we slit each other's throats over the wheres and the whats and the hows and the whens, let's end the embargo. Let's just keep the embargo ended. Now, what do I mean by that? It's easy. Right? Ending the truth embargo is not coming up with an entire 4,000 DVD set or videos explaining everything. No, the truth embargo is the unwillingness and the decision by governments to deny simply the presence of these extraterrestrials. That is the truth embargo. That is the truth that matters that's being embargoed. And ending that is simple. You just get to a place where a head of state, such as the President of the United States, Russia, could be the UK, China for sure, could be India, right? Could even be Italy, possibly. But obviously, the more substantial the country, the more advanced the country, if they're a nuclear power, that's important, would be helpful. Get one of those heads of states to come out and deliver the bona fides, because I assure you, every one of these heads of state have got within their military and within their government the kinds of stuff we have. They got stuff that you haul that out and show it, and people go, oh, okay, I get it. It's true. One of them to do that. The rest will follow, and that's the end of the truth embargo. It's that simple. And once that is done, once the world has finally had it confirmed to them that there is a presence, without anything else, without getting into, okay, what are their names, where are they from, how do their craft work, and blah, 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 and all that stuff, just that they are here. That is true. We are not alone. I assure you, a great deal of all this craziness will start to evaporate. Because at that point, you're now going to be moving into what would be more of a standard scientific process in which information is brought forward, it is vetted, it is peer-reviewed, it's established as truth. We move on to something else, and we start to sort the wheat from the chaff and come to a global understanding of what we know, how we know it, what it means, which is, of course, where we have to get to. So ending the truth embargo is simple, which is why it is the fundamental focus of everything I do and why I harp on it and harped on it forever. I'm a disclosure advocate. What is disclosure? Capital D disclosure, not small d disclosure. That's been going on forever, right? And it'll go on for the rest of infinity, rest of time. Always finding something new and disclosing it, small d. I'm talking about capital D disclosure. It's confusing, I understand, but I still like that choice. Capital D disclosure is confirmation of the non-human presence, the extraterrestrial presence by heads of state, period. That's why the focus is there, because everything else gets resolved because you do that in the post-disclosure era. We're just trying to get to the post-disclosure era. Just like, and there's a great analogy here, because one of the things that was blocking a certain area of science, we'll call it astronomy, astrophysics, whatever. One of the things that was blocking great advancement there is that there was a codified and religiously backed theory that the Earth was the center of everything. And the reason that was religiously backed was that it kind of it worked well with the theologies and so forth, particularly in the Western world and Catholicism and so forth. And until that was changed, you couldn't, it was hard to, you couldn't figure it, you couldn't understand it. And so we got this problem. The church says that we're the center of the universe. Everything runs around us, and other aspects of it, which are totally wrong. And so we're blocked. And the scientists were still kind of work around that and still figure out anyway. And the church would step in and say, I'm sorry, but get along, or we're going to put you on a stake and set you on fire. The moment it was acknowledged that we are not the center of the universe, that the sun is the center of the solar system, that is a paradigm shift. And from there forward, we were able to start advancing in terms of astrophysics and understanding of our place in this universe at warp speed. Now, this is a much bigger version of that. That was kind of simple. It was slow because those times, obviously science wasn't as developed as it is now. It took a long time, right? But what's happening now is far more profound than that, and it's happening at a much faster pace. But it's basically the same thing. There is something standing between the human race, all of its intellectual power, scientific understanding, and a proper understanding of our place in this world, and a whole bunch of physics and other things, because governments made a decision that they would not acknowledge that we're not alone. Meaning, we're going to do everything to prevent that from becoming a thing. Fortunately for us, this happened after World War II, when there were a lot of changes geopolitically. Some of the worst governments were gone. There were still going to be problems, but nevertheless, it was a different time. And so the effort to oppose this policy did not result in mass murders, purges, hundreds of scientists disappearing, people being rounded up. No, but there was a time when that would have been the case. And so in this last 70-something years, there have been a very few numbers of people that have had to pay the ultimate price for challenging this, how would you say, embargo, this government policy. There have been some, right? But nothing like we have seen in the past when you have had people challenging the authoritative power. So, and I'm happy for that. I've been at it for 30 years. I've never been bothered. I've never been threatened. One of the reasons is I operate absolutely in the open. I hide nothing. I don't hide anything. I mean, somebody wants to do a signal call, I'll do it. But I want the government to know everything I'm doing, so they don't have any reason to be paranoid about it. I'm also not a witness. I don't have a classification. So I'm not saying that other people aren't bothered. They are, and they do have their issues and problems. But comparing to past epochs, they're not that bad. And so now, of course, things are really breaking through. But there's still going to be some issues and problems. And you've just mentioned some of them. And there's going to be more. But overall, we're making progress every day. And anything that is happening to oppose that progress, it's extremely important to understand we see it happening. We know it's happening. We're aware of it, which means that overall, we're going to continue to move forward and ultimately get the outcome that we want.
Let me give you an opinion and let me make a statement, and I would like you to argue with me and disprove what I'm saying, basically.
Which one? The one thing?
From a non-American perspective, right?
Right.
I believe that the disclosure with the capital D that you talk about is great for humanity as a whole. It's
Good.
not great only for the United States.
Oh, yes. Everything. It changes everything. Yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, disclosure with the capital D, I don't see as beneficial for the U.S. establishment, for the U.S. government as it is today, and for all other governments for that matters, for all other superpowers, because once you establish that, then you open the doors to ETs making themselves more visible, for this to become reality for everybody. And at that point, the unipolar world is over. A world where the US is the only superpower and the geopolitical movement, I believe that time is over. It's time for reconciliation. It's time for coming together, which is fantastic for humanity. Again, not great for the established powers of today. It will take a couple of generations to remove the people that actually want us to continue to be one against each other, separate, Russia versus China versus the US, etc., etc. So from that point of view, I don't see disclosure with a capital D ever happening unless is forced by the ET themselves.
Okay. This is not an unreasonable assessment. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not an unreasonable assessment. Here is where I think what you might want to consider.
Yeah.
First of all, the transition to this other world you're talking about, that's not a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing. Okay.
Absolutely.
As far as the United States, we're not the only superpower now, right? In fact, we're heading down. So the idea that...
But the policy is still that one, right? The policy in your State Department is still unipolar hegemony, right?
Well, unipolar is not the right word, I think.
Okay.
The United States, there are people in our government that have the illusion that the United States is the only true superpower and it is unassailable and that status can never go away. That's not true. It's already eroded. The number of nukes in the world is around 13,000. And the U.S. and the Soviet Union have about the same number. China less, right? But they have enough. There are 9 nuclear powers. China's economy is bigger than ours, and it's continuing to get bigger than ours. So those that are holding that illusion, well, they're somebody needs to slap them across the face and wake them up because they're living an illusion. All right, and so there's that, and then let me respond this way. I assure you, every government has got people in them, in one level or another, that would rather not have this happen. I mean, there's no question about that. And so, yeah, there are people that don't want it to happen in the United States, probably in China, Soviet Union, whatever, or Russia rather. So what? Right? That just because there are people that don't want it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Because there is a growing number of people that do want it, obviously. Okay, and so, and more importantly, there are a number of countries that can end the embargo. And so while one country may not want to, the other country may do it. There's enormous benefits to the first country that ends the truth embargo. And I've talked about this for years. I actually said this on an interview on a Russian national television network that I gave it to them that they used in somewhere for it. When I was in Moscow, I went to Moscow and actually gave a 2-3 hour interview on this. Meaning that the nation that goes first and finally ends this embargo and reveals what increasingly millions of people already know is true, that we're not alone, and opens the door to learning everything else, that nation literally becomes a kind of, well, what's the word I'm looking for? It achieves a legacy, and that leader achieves a legacy which history will be talking about for a very long time. It will be kind of an immediate leader of the post-disclosure world. This will be a tremendous legacy. It will be valuable to them. Other nations will follow. So there are significant benefits to the country that finally goes first. So, okay, that's easy. The United States obviously believes that no other nation will go first, that it'll happen when they happen, when the United States wants it to happen. And let me tell you, the list of things the United States wants and thinks will not happen because we are so powerful, so unassailable, is growing and growing and growing. We're living under illusions which are not helping and serving us well. And I blame the government for this, not the public. The public doesn't want to live in illusions. It wants to know the truth. It wants to be able to know what's going to happen in the future and not have it be a total crapshoot. But government policies in the United States have been significantly flawed. They haven't all been bad. But if you look at the last 80 years, our government has made some horrendous, I'm trying to make a new word there, horrendous mistakes, as have all of the major other nations, I assure you. And the culmination of all of these mistakes has led us to a point where we're on the verge of nuclear war. We are on the verge of all kinds of humanitarian crises, both environmental and just human, in the sense that people are going to be starving, there's going to be riots, there's going to be mass migrations, as every mistake we've ever made in dealing with the world we're in culminates, whatever the hell. It's going to be awful. All this is being well predicted. Okay, so all these mistakes have led to this. Now, okay, so what do? You have to change your worldview, your thinking, your policies, how you interact, and you've got to start fixing things. One of the things you got to fix is you got to get rid of the nukes. And so how do we do that? I see one path there. We have to get disclosure. We have to confirm the extraterrestrial presence. That has to become part of all global interactions and diplomacies. We have to start getting the science out. People need to learn the truth. And in that post-disclosure era lies the possibility of acting in the opposite of what you just described. You're saying that people don't want to, there are people in government don't want to disclose because they want to keep acting the behavior to stay the same, knowing that it's going to lead us to essentially Armageddon. I'm saying in the post-disclosure world, countries are going to have the opportunity to change their behavior. All right. And to me, it's that simple. It's like somebody that's been lying their entire life. They're a pathological liar. And you say to them, and it's causing them all manner of awfulness, right? Their life is hell. And you say to them, look, if you'll just start telling the truth, things will get better. And they will say, oh, no. If I tell the truth, my life will be awful because I'll be constantly attacked and criticized and ostracized forever because everybody will know how I lied. And so I have to keep lying and being miserable because if I tell the truth, it will be even worse. This is a very human mistake. And governments are made up of humans. And so what we're saying to the military intelligence complex, not only of the United States, but every other major nation, you've been lying for 80 years. You're afraid that if you actually start telling the truth, people will be mad at you. They will be. But will circumstances have a chance to get way better than they are, maybe even saving us from Armageddon? Yeah. And overall, in the end, people will be very pleased that you finally started telling the truth. And as the world starts getting fixed and things start getting better, and we're not worried about, whether our grandchildren have a chance in hell of having a life. And you'll be happy that you disclose. But getting this done has proven difficult. But I can tell you right now, disclosure is inevitable. It will happen. Hopefully before we have a nuclear war. It could happen after a nuclear war, but frankly, nobody may care. and it won't matter. Meaning, yeah, we have disclosure now, but it doesn't matter. It's over, right? You know, if you're alive, kill yourself because the living will, in fact, envy the dead. So what can I say? It's going to happen.
I think
Every
that,
day more people understand that it's going to happen, and that's important.
yeah, and to be honest, I think that your position is beautiful and it's hopeful, and I hope you're right. My position is slightly different, in the sense that I believe disclosure is happening. Disclosure with a capital D, but disclosure with a capital D for me is not government driven. ETs are showing up, and are showing up very soon, and it's going to be. So now the problem is narrative control. The way I see is narrative control. And so my two questions to you, and you can address them as you want. Number one, you're in Washington, so I'd love from you the pulse of the situation today, what's happening behind the scene, if you can say from your perspective, because we had the last hearing just a few weeks ago. And the second part is, there are narratives that at some point we need to reconcile, right? And so far, the government is pushing a narrative that is self-contained into technology, reverse engineering, threat, national security, etc., etc. And yet there are also parts of government, former government officials and whistleblowers, etc., that are starting to talk about consciousness, contact, etc. But we had, for the last 30, 40 years, thousands of experiencers, thousands of contactees, channelers, etc. And you started your career with John Mack, that have been telling a completely different story from what the government is trying to tell today with a narrative, with a threat narrative. How can we put those things together? How would you synthesize the government-led narrative and disclosure narrative with the fringe contactee, abductees, channelers reality of the last 30 years?
Well, that's an easy one.
I know.
David, you stop with these easy questions. I mean, come on, man. You got to challenge me. Look, somebody gives me $50,000. I will hire a co-author, ghostwriter, whatever the hell, and I'll write a 1,000-page book about that. You know, I'm semi-joking about the answer to that. Let me see if I can clean that up a little bit. First of all, the United States government does not have a narrative about the extraterrestrial issue, in a sense. There is no narrative, okay, other than there's no ETs here, okay? There are no ETs here, right? They might say, well, if there were ETs here, it might be a threat. But the government narrative is there is nothing at all, no evidence whatsoever. Recently, they reinforced that. Occasionally they reinforce this narrative because increasingly it's transparent, it's desperate, but whatever. They keep trying, and that was the Arrow study that they released, which basically said, we looked at all this stuff, and we found no evidence whatsoever of any what we'll call non-human intelligence. They put that study out. It's still out there. It will go down in history as one of the dumbest ass things the government's ever done, but whatever. So so there's the narrative of the government. There's nothing. Okay, now there is a narrative there are narratives within the what I call the disclosure activist process, or the disclosure activism. And it's complicated, not surprisingly. All right. And so you've got people that are coming forward. The vast majority of them are just witnesses. Only a very small percentage are whistleblowers. And I encourage people, they have to understand the difference between a witness and a whistleblower. They are not the same thing. And people use that same phrase. A witness is someone that has information that's coming forward. It's irrelevant, and they're going to provide it. And there are many of those. A whistleblower is somebody that's got some very damning information. It could be a confirmation of illegal action that is taking place in their workplace, that they have been told, don't talk about this. They may have a non-disclosure agreement that prevents them from telling about it, even though it's illegal. People like that, those are whistleblowers. So a regular witness is not a whistleblower. And so lumping them all together is not helping them. Because if somebody hears that that John Smith is a whistleblower, they don't need to know anything more to text them some death threats. So again, it's mostly all witnesses and a couple of whistleblowers at this point. And these witnesses, whistleblowers, putting forth information. And that information is part of a developing narrative. But obviously, if the government continues to deny there's anything going at all, these bits and pieces are not going to be easy to assemble into a comprehensive and dependable narrative. We're doing the best we can, right? Recently, the government, the DOD and Department of Defense, in an effort to, again, undermine this process underway, which is leading inevitably to disclosure, invited the Wall Street Journal to send over some reporters so they can give them a great story. And so they did, and they published this story in the Wall Street Journal, 2 articles. And these were awful. I mean, they were beyond bad. I mean, they're an embarrassment, and the Wall Street Journal will be answering for it forever. But one of the aspects of the articles was that the government has been putting deliberately fake stuff out for years, right? That looks kind of UFO-ish or whatever, to sort of muddy the waters and test things or whatever the hell, right? Meaning, some of the stuff you might thought was UFO, but there are no UFOs and no ETs, but it was to our benefit to kind of put stuff out that made you think that. Now, can you see why that's going to be a problem when truthful people are trying to come forward and explain what they know? Some of it may be deliberate hoaxes by their own government to undermine it. So the nature of the truth embargo and how they've conducted it is guaranteed that the legitimate effort by well-meaning people, whether they are outside of government just trying to, as researchers looking in, or whether they're insiders coming forward with information, is going to be extremely complicated. And it's going to have flaws. And to the extent it has flaws and is complicated, the truth embargo managers are going, okay, good. The more problems, the better, because, they're closing in on us here. And my God, we're just trying to keep it off. And I get that. What I try to do is simplify it for people and give them a broader perspective so that they don't get into these traps. So if a witness comes forward that's legitimate, but says something that can be proven wrong, you don't completely, your hair's on fire and you immediately start attacking them, right? Not understanding how complex this process is and how polluted the overall understanding is, deliberately polluted by the government itself, which has enormous powers and resources to do that. And there's countless examples of this. The government wants you and him, it's called let's you and him fight, right? In other words, the government's constantly going, let's you and him fight. You fight, you fight, you fight. We love it. Fight all you want, right? Because if you're fighting each other, you are not focusing on us sitting there with the fundamental information completely, at our disposal, covered up, protected by all kinds of legal secrecy laws and so forth. And I'm saying, don't do that. Don't fight each other. Look at the government and say, look, we're not asking you to bring all the ETs out so we can all talk to them personally. We don't want you to bring all the crash vehicles out so we can kind of rummage them through them like a garage sale. We understand that the billions of dollars that you have spent and all that you have learned over the last 80 years is not something you can just be pushed out the door. The UAP Disclosure Act, which will eventually get passed, but it's, 3rd time around. Actually, it's the 4th time they've tried to get it done, but it'll happen, and it will help bring everything out. All we're saying is simply acknowledge that it exists. Okay? If you'll just do that, you will find that people will start getting a lot more nice about this, a lot more understanding. And the whistleblowers, the real whistleblowers, will have a lot fewer death threats. The number of people with information that could come forward will increase. And overall, things will settle down pretty quickly. But as long as that policy exists, as long as no head of state, including our president, does not come forward and end this fundamental lie that we are absolutely alone, there is no evidence at all for a non-human presence, this is going to continue to be problematic and difficult, wasteful, stupid, awkward, and money and time is going to be wasted. So Just do it. And so one of the things that I'll tell you right now that you need to know, and your viewers need to know, is that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes in the United States on this issue than you're seeing publicly. Yes, there have been hearings, of course, but for every witnesses that is testified in front of Congress, 10 or 15 have been discussed and have been meeting with people. There are witnesses that are known with important information that won't come forward yet, and they don't want to subpoena them, but they may eventually come forward, as this is a dynamic, changing situation, right? So the level of engagement of Congress only partially reflects the understanding. In other words, there are a lot of people in Congress that know a lot, but they're not taking action. There are a number of people in Congress that don't know anything. But the total knowledge base of Congress is not reflected by what you're seeing in the news, right? These are not stupid people. So they know a lot more than they are using to engage or not engage at all. But enough of them are engaging that now thing is a fully legislative process underway dealing with this issue, which the government still says doesn't exist, which is getting increasingly awkward. And how many Tim Burchetts and others go on television who are going to get reelected saying there's ETs here before it gets really kind of silly. All right. And so I understand your thinking. There are a number of reasons why disclosure can't happen. You can come up with a lot of them. But what I've tried to do is come up with the reasons why it will happen and why it's beneficial for it to happen. You know, it's easy to come up with the reasons why something can't happen, but you've also got to balance that against all the reasons it should happen and could happen. And there are a lot of huge benefits for that. And so I'm suggesting that the benefits are increasingly being shown to outweigh the detriments. And so for every person that thinks, oh my God, this is going to be catastrophic, others are going, no, it's going to be just fine. And by the way, catastrophic disclosure, this term is not helpful. All right. I get it. It's being thrown around, but it's one of those terms that has not been properly defined yet. And it's kind of a standard thing you just throw out, which is really doesn't really say anything. It means whatever somebody wants to say. A less difficult term is called the controlled disclosure, which is confused with catastrophic disclosure. But controlled disclosure has two meanings. One is correct and one is not. Some people believe that disclosure is being manipulated and controlled to nefarious purposes in order to create to achieve certain nefarious goals. Project Bluebeam, whatever the hell. It's a kind of a controlled, manipulative thing, which is really not the truth. It's not disclosure of the truth, but it is a disclosure process that is designed to control with some manipulators. That's not what's happening. What is happening is that the concept of controlled disclosure has been put forward. It's been put forward by Schumer and Rounds in the UAP Disclosure Act, when they say there is a controlled disclosure process, controlled disclosure. What are they referring to? It's not complicated. They're saying that once we start bringing this stuff out, in other words, once we start a robust small d disclosure process regarding all things ET, it needs to be done in a responsible way. And so there has to be a process to protocols to control how it is done. Now, I would have preferred they didn't use that word. I would have come up with something else, a responsible disclosure process, not a controlled disclosure process. But that's why it's in there, and that's what it is. Yeah. In other words, we're not going to just shove this stuff out and say, rummage through it. No, it's going to come out. But as it is coming out, the one thing that will be understood is that ETs are here. We are not alone. The government's got a shitload of stuff, and it's going to be coming out to you, and you will understand that. And as it's coming out, you will understand you can't get it all at once, but it is coming out, and we are in the post-disclosure world. To me, that's as simple as you can put it. So I define disclosure, capital D, as the confirmation from the head of state. And since I defined it, any other capital D definition is wrong, right? In other words, it's like you got what's the dictionary? You got Webster's dictionary, and Webster's dictionary says the definition of this is that, and you can go forward into the public and say, I am proclaiming today that the definition of this term in Webster's is wrong. In fact, I am redefining it, and people say, I appreciate your boldness, but nah, that's the definition. You have to come up with a new word that defines what you're talking about, but you can't replace that definition with yours. That's why now look, if I don't write books. If I had written a book and made a big chapter about this, right, it would kind of be a thing. But since I don't have the patience to write, it's just I just do podcasts. So instead of writing a 500-page book, I've done 600 podcasts. So, but if one day capital D disclosure turns up in the Webster's dictionary and defined as the confirmation of this non-human presence in the world by such and such, head of state, I will die a happy man. I will have that on my hospital end table there, open to that definition, and go, God damn, Steve, at least you got that done, right? They gave you that because I'm sticking to that. I'm telling you, that's what capital E disclosure is. I'm never going to let up on that. And if the ETs ruin this for me, because apparently 3i Atlas is a 2-mile wide ET craft coming to, engage us and disclose something. In fact, there's a lot of things. But if the ETs end up showing up en masse, and so all the heads of state have got to run out and go, oh my God, oh look, folks, yeah, we're not alone. And that's not the capital E disclosure I defined. And so consequently, they would have screwed me. And if it happens, it happens. I mean, I'll take it. But I'll tell you, you don't want that. You don't want that. You don't want every head of state having to come out on a Monday morning and say, there's a 2-mile wide craft above the capital of our country. And so I don't think we're alone. You don't want that. That's not a good thing. There's going to be a lot of upset and turmoil. What you want is an advanced thinking head of state who has come to an extraordinary decision that it's time for the citizens of his or her country to know this truth, to step out there, provide the bona fides, and end the embargo. And then the other heads of states kind of join in over about a week's time until the whole world knows they're not alone. That's what you want. You don't want that other thing. That's why I don't define that.
I agree with you that would be a courageous politician with integrity. And I mean, I don't believe that politicians with integrity don't exist. So I don't put everybody on the same level. I'll give you that disclosure with the cap. Maybe it's not going to be disclosure with the capital D. I believe that. So when I remember what Carnell described the catastrophic versus controlled disclosure at the Sol Foundation 2 years ago, right?
Okay.
And the definition was, as you said, controlled disclosure, exactly that. Let's define a process that we manage. Mm-hmm. That is a 15 years or a 10 years process to go through this, which is then the process that came out on the UPDA and the UAP Disclosure Act, because Carnell was actually one of the people advising Congress on the legislation, right? And when it came to catastrophic disclosure simply means it's not the US government releasing the information first. Somebody will come before us. It's going to be China or it's going to be Russia, and we're going to have to play catch up, and then we're not going to be able to control the narrative, and it's going to create a lot of anger. So I don't see catastrophic disclosure as a catastrophe. I simply see catastrophic disclosure as something that is not anymore in the hands of the US government, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up because because I actually should have said this before. I wasn't clear. The principal reason catastrophic disclosure is not helpful right now is that it has too many definitions, right? Everybody's got their own version of what catastrophic disclosure is. So when you say it, what the hell are you talking about? All right. So for one person, catastrophic disclosure is another head of state goes first. I get that. It's kind of catastrophic. Maybe, well, it's And in that case, I don't think it's that catastrophic, but it's awkward. All right. Meaning we're not first. Oh, we're so sad that, and our president has to come out and say, yeah, that's true. And well, why didn't you tell us and so forth? But this is not catastrophe. So that's one version. Another version of catastrophic disclosure is the ETs force it. They come down, major ships, basically hovering over wherever the hell they want. And we literally have to acknowledge, oh, and this happens in movies all the time. I guess we're not alone. And then the heads of state are running around going nuts. People are worried if we're launching nuclear weapons at them, whatever the hell. And yeah, that's a very big shock. That's another definition of catastrophic disclosure. And it's kind of catastrophic, right? It's definitely not comfortable. Another version of catastrophic disclosure is disclosure that is done, in fact, falsely. In other words, they're disclosing the ET presence, but they're lying. Yeah, there's ETs here, but they are doing this and that and everything else, right? They have underground caverns where they take thousands of humans and boil them up and then, drink them. They drink our blood, whatever the hell. In other words, it's a disclosure, but it's a lie. They don't properly represent it, thus creating any manner of upset depending upon the nature of the lie. That's a form of catastrophic disclosure.
Yep.
And so forth. And so you see the problem here. Unless it's well defined, what the hell are we talking about? And so I'm saying, look, controlled disclosure as opposed to irresponsible disclosure. Okay? And disclosure is nothing more than confirmation of the ET presence. That's it. And that's just not catastrophic. So, no, I'm not throwing shade on Colonel Nell. I mean, he's a brilliant guy. He's a genius. And he is trying to convey an idea. What he's really saying is this. There are ways that we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. This is a big deal right now. And the hard way is you don't want to do it the hard way. You want to do it the right way. And so that is another way of looking at it. And so if someone has a better way to go about this, I'm open to hearing it, but nobody has come up with a better idea, then just confirm the fundamental truth. Confirm the fundamental truth.
So I agree with you.
There's ETs. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying I agree with you in the sense that the way you define it is absolutely what's needed right now. Yeah. I think that there are other ways, but let's say that the way you define it in terms of the acknowledgement is what is needed now. The plan that Carnell has, I don't think that it's realistic anyway, because I think that we're not going to define the time frame of whatever happens after we acknowledge, because other forces, ETs included, are going to jump into the conversation. So the 10 years to the Disclosure Act, taking everything into the archives, putting a commission together, spending 5 years reviewing everything, I don't think that that's really realistic at all. I understand that policymakers need to think that way and plan that way, but I don't think that that's what reality is beyond the acknowledgement.
Well, yeah, this is another point of confusion here. Yeah, you're really bringing out the right points. I appreciate this. There is a lot of confusion between small d disclosure and capital D disclosure. I take responsibility because I decided that the formal confirmation would be capital D disclosure. I could have gone with confirmation with a capital C, but I just felt that could be even worse. So, okay. So people are confusing disclosure with a capital D, which is simple confirmation, and disclosure with the small d. And so they'll say, look, it's going to take years to get disclosure. And what they're really saying is, maybe they know it, maybe they don't. It's going to take years for us to get all of this disclosed to us, all of the information available, and so that we can learn about it, our scientists can engage it, and so forth. And it will take years. There's no question. But they're confusing that with the confirmation event, and so you got people that'll say to me, there's no chance any head of state is going to confirm. It's going to be 7, 8 years before that happens. And I'm going, it could happen tomorrow. And so there is this important confusion. In other words, what we need now is simply confirmation, right? the rest follows. Now, the idea that what we need to do is keep dragging stuff out. We'll get a piece of this and a piece of that, and a whistleblower here and a whistleblower there, until it gets so uncomfortable for the government, they just finally have to yield. And I'm saying, no, that's the worst possible way. That approach, if you go that way, it just means the government has all kinds of ways to play games with it, hide the ball. More whistleblowers will get death threats. It's irresponsible. You could call it catastrophic disclosure, right? In other words, some people think the only way we're going to get disclosure if millions of people march on Washington. They're stretching out as far as the eye can see, and they all have "We want disclosure" signs in front of them, and that will just literally force the White House to do something, which is the way some things get done in activism. But this issue does not lend itself to that. And I'm going, no, that's a lot of work and effort. Think of all the cost of flying into D.C. and getting a hotel and then, marching up and down, spreading viruses to each other. No. All you need is for a head of state to say, yes, we're not alone. And we are sorry we kept that from you or denied it for all these years. It was a national security matter because we are still in a nuclear arms race of sorts. We're in Cold War II. We've been in a position where we could launch a nuclear strike at any time. That would be awful. And we felt that the ET presence issue created too many potential known unknowns and unknown unknowns that it would be irresponsible. And so the vote was always not yet, not yet. We're sorry, please forgive us. And everybody's going to go, I'm really irritated, but, I forgive you. And now, what are we going to know next, right? It's that simple. And people say, well, no, if we disclose, then somehow that means that China will get a leg up or whatever the hell. Though it is true, if another nation discloses, it will be a bit of a blow to the United States, but ultimately won't matter. But I get it. All of the arguments against confirmation by a head of state just don't hold up. Now, I've never debated anybody on this, and I don't debate anybody. I don't debate online. I don't criticize. I don't attack, because it makes my life a lot easier. But I've talked about sitting down with Richard Dolan and having a dialogue. I think it would be very useful. But if I was ever going to debate on this issue with anybody, it wouldn't be our ETs here. I mean, that would be just ridiculous. But I'm willing to debate with somebody the question of whether formal disclosure by a head of state is or is not the best way to finally end this embargo, as opposed to whatever else one might come up with, and why it's most beneficial. I'd make that case. And so, and that's kind of my job, because I watch all of the turmoil that's going on, all of the upheaval, all of the internet stuff, all of the people attacking each other, all of the upset over this photo and that photo or this video, and all of the political upheaval that's going on. I watch it. I get it. It doesn't make it easy for me to sleep, I'll tell you. But that's why I keep coming back to the fundamental. If you're upset by all this, if you hate seeing all the nonsense online on this issue, if you hate people lying about it, if you hate fake photos, whatever, support confirmation. Support the disclosure from the president, which means, okay, and how do you do that? Well, I'll tell you. There's a lot of ways to do it. Support all the activist organizations with your money, but people just don't do that. I get it, whatever. But the New Paradigm Institute right now, which is about 1.5 years old, its whole basic, it's the same for me, but it's a much more robust and funded organization. But the New Paradigm Institute's fundamental goal is get disclosure from the president, right? And it's developed, and it's using all the political tools that the people behind it have used in dealing with other activism. And so when you go to the newparadigminstitute.org, you will see how you can approach your members of Congress. You can see videos and so forth that are pretty much all about capital D disclosure, and how we get there.
Yeah.
It's not so much about how can we get that ET craft out there and start converting that into some new cool technology so my electric bill goes down 98%. No, it's basically about getting disclosure, capital D. it's a little less aggressive in how it phrases it, but that's okay. That's my job. So there is an example. If somebody popped a couple of $1 million into the New Paradigm Institute, I assure you, a whole lot more would be happening there to advance the disclosure process, and that is a far less expensive way than trying to convince people to spend a fortune to march on Washington with signs demanding the truth from the government. No, we know enough, and there's enough politically engaged people now, and there's enough people in Congress and so forth, that frankly the president could come out tomorrow and nobody would even bat an eye. And that's what I think I will leave you with now. How are we doing on time? It's, what is it, 5:30?
I think we are done, and I don't want to keep you long enough, so I'm going to say two things quickly. The first one. But
let me finish. Let me finish. Let me just give you this last thing, and then you can do it.
Absolutely.
There is significant, meaningful. There is, how can I phrase this? There are a number of meaningful indications that indicate that disclosure by President Trump is on the table. Now, the table is not in the open. It's in a room somewhere. You can't see it, but it's on the table. And one of the reasons it's on the table is that disclosure by the president could be very beneficial or mitigating to the president and the Republican Party as they navigate what are becoming extremely volatile and intense issues. In other words, it's an incredibly good thing to do. It will be historically profound. It will be an amazing legacy for our president to do this. And therefore, it could be mitigating with respect to whatever else is headed the president's way and the Republican Party's way, because he is a Republican, so it'll be a Republican disclosure in a sense. And I think that reason, certain people are aware of that, and that possibly is being put forward. Now, what I've just said is an absolute nonpartisan statement, I assure you. It's a simple truth that the president has in his power the ability to end this embargo, and that will be an extraordinarily significant thing that will be rewarded with a great legacy, regardless of everything else. Everything else, I don't want to go there. I don't care. Yeah. But that is on the table, and I'm not talking about as much as I used to, but I am bringing it up. No matter how bad things get in the United States politically, whatever happens, that is on the table of the president, and I believe it is being considered. Beyond that, I cannot go. So if you want to, you had some comments you wanted to wrap up with?
So you basically answered one of my last question, which was, what do you think is happening right now? And so you've already closed beautifully this conversation. I'm only going to say that I will be absolutely thrilled to host you and Richard to have that debate or that friendly conversation at some point in the future. So you're welcome anytime. Steve.
Yeah, one day we'll do it. We've had a couple of shots, but he's a busy guy. He's writing 17 books now. He's got 2 podcasts, whatever the hell. He's in 3 docs. But let's just say that of all the people out there that I've ever sat down and talked with, it is the most dynamic and cool. It's just, we just kind of play off each other really well. Maybe we'll be able to do that in the future, maybe in the post-disclosure era. But one thing I will add is this. Look, Paradigm Research Group is a nonprofit now. If I'm able to get some tax-deductible funding from some American citizens, some fine American citizens, I have some projects I would like to do. But I do anticipate disclosure happening soon. And at some point, I'm going to be putting out the word to my supporters throughout Europe, certainly, mostly throughout Europe, posting in Europe, to maybe do another speaking tour. I've done 3 in Europe. One was like 18 cities. All these cities, all these speaking venues were set up by supporters. They did it, and I come and spoke. I spoke in Italy. I spoke everywhere. I'm about to do that again, looking ahead to hopefully speaking in these various cities and so forth in a post-disclosure world. when the interest and need and the desire to kind of get a handle on things will be huge. But it may be in the latter days of the truth embargo. We'll see. But I'm going to try to put together a very extensive speaking tour next year in Europe, supported by my supporters out there who set up the venues, and I'll be sending out stuff on that, and I'll be doing podcasts to try to get that going. When I did this before, back in 2008, 2010, the podcast revolution had not started. And so I was able to do this simply through social media and Facebook. This time, I'll have the podcast platforms to work from. So I'm looking forward to maybe having the opportunity to speak to a lot of wonderful people in Europe about these things, and maybe even bring some cool slides, assuming I can master AI to the necessary level that is required now to even show up with a slideshow. I'm hoping I can do that, but I'm an old guy and I don't learn new tricks easy. But that's in the works too. So I look forward to talking to you then. And
absolutely.
If you have any other questions later on, don't hesitate.
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing you in Europe, and hopefully even in Washington. I think that there is a fantastic event coming up in December connected to what's it called, the Infinity University, the Ubiquity University, and
State of the World Forum, stateoftheworld.forum. That's an unusual extension, but it's called stateoftheworld.forum.
Yep.
It is a major event, December 14 to 18 or 19, stateoftheworld.forum. It is the continuation of a project that ran from 1990 something to 2005. There's been 9 of them, okay, culminated in 2005, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Jim Garrison was the president of the forum. He was also the president of the Gorbachev Foundation. He's bringing that back because, like then, when we were in the aftermath of the end of the Soviet Union, with a lot of hopeful and promise of a new world that's better than the old world, they were trying to do these things. They had very high level, even heads of state come in and talk. We're now facing another transition, even bigger than that, frankly, but a little harder to understand. And so he's trying to reinstate the State of the World Forum, which he wants to continue for the next 10 years, well into what will be the post-disclosure world. And so you can check that out, stateoftheworld.forum, and you can learn about that. There's also the potential for a major conference in one of the United Arab Emirates in December as well, but it's still not sealed. It's not locked down, but it would be huge. So there's that. And of course, there's going to be at least 1, maybe 2 more congressional hearings before the end of the year, in spite of all the other foo-fa going on. And there's other witnesses that are looking to come forward. And of course, the nuclear witnesses are in play, and we may see that hearing, which would be, in my view, major, because the world needs to finally hear under oath that, yeah, the ET shut our weapons down, our nuclear weapons down. There was not a damn thing we do about it. And they did it more than once. And that will advance the disclosure movement substantially. So the rest of the year could still be great. But on the other hand, the rest of the year also looks like it's going to have some very difficult and potentially very unpleasant things as well, as you know. Yeah. We've had a lot of very unpleasant things happening. There's more coming. I wish that weren't the case, but that's the way it is. And so the trick is to just keep moving forward as best we can to get this goal of disclosure accomplished, regardless of what else happens. Because the one thing I believe, as deeply as I possibly could believe anything, is that these awful things that were happening are less likely to happen after disclosure. We may be able to move to a place where we can stop this kind of stuff that we're seeing relentlessly. And I don't get into particulars, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. That the chance of actually getting away from that post-disclosure is realistically definable. As opposed to getting away from it before disclosure? No way. No way. Without that major event, it's going to get worse and worse and worse until all of our worst fears the sum of all our fears, quoting Tom Clancy, will in fact happen. And I'm old enough that I won't experience much of it. But if you're a Gen Zer, man, I don't want to be you. And so if you're a Gen Zer, back the disclosure process, because you're the one that's going to have to really live through the consequences of not getting it done. But we're going to do our best until then. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think that I completely agree with you that the world post-disclosure with capital D is a much better place to be. So thank you.
My pleasure, sir. Anytime. Look forward to coming to Italy. Maybe see you there.
And hopefully I'll see you in December.
Yes, indeed. All right, sir.
Bye. Thank you so much for watching. Something is Up is still at the very beginning, so every bit of support makes a huge difference in my ability to bring you more amazing stories and incredible guests. If you enjoy this conversation and feel called to support the channel, I'd be super grateful if you could just click the like and subscribe buttons and share the video with anyone you think might enjoy. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.